of Illinois, I've heard time and again all over the state the number of folks who work for small businesses that do work for the state of Illinois that can't get paid. You can't pay the company, then that business owner can't hire.
Right.
They can't expand their business,
right.
and they're floating a loan to the state of Illinois. Well, in addition to being financially bad policy, it's just wrong. Right? Let's just put the proper label on it. It's just flat out wrong. So I think the first thing you need to do is address short-term cash flow problems so the state can catch up on its bills. That's point number one.
Okay.
Number two, you have to take the longer view of how are we going to structurally fix the state of Illinois.
Okay.
And if we were a business, if we were having a bad year, you just don't go automatically increase the price to your customers because you want to.
Right.
You have to justify that in some kind of way.
Right.
And so I would argue that what the state of Illinois could use would be a healthy dose of top to bottom, everything. Are we doing as well as we could? Can we find cost efficiencies? Is there a better way to deliver a public good, whatever service that takes, more efficiently, yes or no? And I don't think that we're there. So first things first, you got to fix the cash flow and you got to stop the bleeding. Right. Then you've got to take the longer term view where if we were a business, we would be calling in the workout specialists to say, save us.
Yeah, I think I had read somewhere that over the last 10 years, the budget has grown disproportionately to both the inflation and to the size of the population of Illinois by exponential amount.
Rampant spending.
And I guess the hard part is, and here's the hard part, a question for anyone being elected, and you're a little bit more operational job than some of the other elected officials that are going to hold.
Oh, it's the most glamorous job on a ticket, don't you know?
Yeah. Exactly. But how do people get elected? The $1 million question is, how do you get elected when the gravy train's running so rampant? How do you pull that gravy back?
I'm optimistic that everybody in Illinois gets it now, that we're a financial train wreck. In fact, on the campaign trail, I was laughing this morning over a cup of coffee. I've been telling everybody that the unfunded pension obligation problem has gotten to be the size of about $85 billion. According to the Tribune today, they're projecting it by the end of 10 to be $95 billion. Oh. So we're nearly $100 billion, nearly $1 billion in every county in Illinois in terms of unfunded pension obligations, and that doesn't even address the drawdown in equity because we're burning through our asset base and another 30 to 32 billion in long-term debt. So we just have this mountain of debts and obligations that we have no real chance anytime soon at addressing, other than we have to sit down, facts on the table, and say, you know what, we need to change.
Yeah.
We're in that much of a crisis. The crisis is that bad. And my sense on the campaign trail, obviously I'm talking mostly to Republicans, is folks get that. So there's an energy and an enthusiasm back in the party about change, but I also think that most people, quite frankly, even though they're attuned to the need to fix things, haven't quite fully gotten their head around how bad it is. So my job, quite frankly, is to say, listen, this is how bad it is, this is the role, and I'll make the commitment of I'll be a strong voice for sanity and I'll do the job well. I mean, it's if you're running for such a glamorous office, you have to take such a glamorous pitch, right?
Exactly. Well, let's talk about the tax structure. What are your thoughts on the current tax structure in Illinois?
It's probably going to have to stay as is. And I say that somewhat cautiously because it's not clear when you're this deep in a hole you can afford to take a lot less revenue. Now, have we chased off a lot of businesses because in addition to playing around with the tax rate, we're also hurting businesses with fees? Absolutely. So a lot of the nightmare that's brought to us by Blagojevich with a compliant legislature needs to get rolled back and fixed. Specifically, this is exactly the wrong time to make any tax increases. Flat out, bar none, absolutely the worst possible time you can do to take up any tax increases.
Low 40s in terms of business favorability.
The total. Oh.
Yeah, and so obviously if you're going to tax businesses, we already tax businesses more than our surrounding states in many respects, so it makes it very difficult to bring businesses into Illinois.
And I heard a great phrase the other day, the corruption tax. I'm not quite sure the original source, but if you were a business and you were looking to invest in the Midwest, and you got Indiana and you got Illinois, you're going to look at the taxes on your business.
Right.
You're going to look at your fee structure.
Right.
You're going to look at your total cost of doing business in the state, i.e., do you have well-educated workers, yes or no, or do you have to invest in their training? What's the prevailing wage type of cost structure? And then you've got this vague terrifying notion of when do you get hit next by the powers that be in Illinois, and that's where I think the corruption tax comes in, and we lose on every single one of those counts versus Indiana.
I think that's an interesting take on that, because one of the fears that I've heard people express that I've known small business people that want to expand, but their biggest fear is they're not in the know with the politicians. So they feel like that their competitor or someone else that's got a better relationship with Springfield or in some cases
local,
county
right?
Or local have a leg up, and that's a corruption tax. That's a very scary prospect for an entrepreneur.
It's vague,
yeah.
and it's elusive, but quite frankly, if you're thinking about coming to Illinois or thinking about expanding, those would have to be in the mix in terms of your consideration set when you want to put a business here. And I think a lot of businesses just drive right on past.
Yeah, interesting.
If you're coming to the Midwest, just stay on 80. So you pick Iowa, pick Indiana, but ignore Illinois. And I think that's something that, quite frankly, the culture of corruption in Illinois needs to be shattered, or we're going nowhere fast.
So you basically say you're bringing better transparency to the office of Comptroller if elected. Give me some other examples of how you stem, because talking to a lot of people, whether Democrat, Republican, Independent, they all say the same thing. They have this distrust of government now, to the point where, I think government falls even below lawyers now. but
these are voters versus political insiders, correct?
Exactly.
Okay, yeah.
So there's a lack of trust, and how does one bring about a reformation, if you will, that brings not just transparency, but that trust back to your elected officials?
Well, it goes right back to, I've thought long and hard about this, which is, do you try and put a lot of spin or sell on the notion of the Comptroller's office? And I think, quite frankly, if you're going to stand and say, pick me because I'm honest and competent, you can't put too much gel cap on the medicine here. This job is what it is. Yep. And its main contribution to the reformation, if you will, is to make it easier for citizens and political activists to know exactly what's happening with their money, so that those groups can then engage the process.
Yeah.
You can't. I can't. Yeah.
You're like an ally to activist groups.
Absolutely,
or
because
watchdogs.
it would be disingenuous, flat out wrong, maybe, to say I can save the state of Illinois in the Comptroller's office. You can't. I can shine a light into every corner of the room so people can go, aha, this is what we need to do different.
But it sounds like you can probably shine a light better than anyone in government, because you hold the purse.
It's money in and it's money out.
That's right. That's right. So you know where it comes and you know where it's going.
And I mentioned to folks that I consider myself to be an optimist, because I'm completely convinced that, assuming Washington doesn't destroy the U.S. economy, but that's a separate issue for a different interview, that we can get this thing moving on the right track, because are these tough economic times? Absolutely.
Okay.
However, the overwhelming majority of our problems is due to really poor decision making year after year after year in Springfield.
Right.
And I think we've hit the breaking point. Breaking point in terms of financially, literally dangerously close to bankrupt, but I also think you've hit the breaking point with individual voters of all stripes, Democrats, Independents, and Republicans. Their tolerance, I think it's gone.
Right. So, as a controller, you do see where all the checks go, and so you would know the top areas where we spend our money in our state. What are the big three? What are the big three things as controller you would say, these are the big three that our legislature, our governor should focus on?
Some are, I think, let me come at the question a little bit differently.
Sure.
You're going to have structural things which you just can't move, because the total state budget's about $54 billion, round numbers. I'd say about 33 of it, depending on the year, is general fund, which covers a lot of the day-in-the-life operations for the state. And then you've got a lot of social service spending, health, healthcare, Medicaid.
I think is the largest budget item.
Medicaid, Medicare, that sort of thing, exactly. And so you're not going to be able to move the needles on those ones, but I've seen a number of proposals from the governors that say, well, why don't we get folks into managed care? Why don't we start investing in good health, not necessarily, treating folks after they've got problems? So you're going to have those issues, and there's always the battle over education. I've got a number of friends and folks I've met at Republican events that are on school boards, and they can give you chapter and verse that the state generally should be sending us $8 million a year across all things, and they're only sending us $4 million. Well, that has a very direct impact on what happens to that local school district and what happens to programs. So it's causing these school boards to have fundamentally challenging economic problems, financial problems.
Well, let me.